first half hour is basically to review and update the work plan, and then based off of our projects, decide what we want to present to our meeting on November 16th to council, because we won't have a meeting between now and then. And just so you know, council likes to hear from multiple people on the preservation board. They don't want one person to present, so we each need to take a small piece of that. What we did is in anticipation of this meeting is, for those of you that are not familiar, is that we've had a work plan that was based off of a community program called True Grit, where we got input from the community, and we came up with a very large work plan. It was like 5 pages, I think. And slowly we've whittled it away. And so now we're looking at updating that work plan, adding some things, putting on there some ongoing programs, as you can see. And because this was a short amount of time that we had, and we didn't want to call another meeting just to do this because we really need to get to our training and didn't want to do this kind of work after we had spent time in training, is Mike and I took a pass at the work plan. And then we met with Andrea, Dennis, and Jocelyn, and we reviewed it and what they've heard from City Council, because remember, we're appointed by City Council to do what they want us to do. And we came up with this work plan. And let me go over it real quick, and then I'd like to talk about how we might like to change things. We've been working for a long time in increasing participation in the Main Street Historic District. Our main strategy has been to talk to homeowners and property owners, business owners, and what we thought we might do is look at some different strategies. That has kind of stalled out. Maybe some of the strategies may be to have a mandatory historic district, and maybe we could convince council to do something that's pretty radical. Expand the district to include Alamo, and then maybe just identify some landmarks and districts. The second one is a historic building awareness program that actually City Council wants staff to work on. And this would allow, through some sort of communication program, to make those owners of historic buildings, and could go beyond the Main Street District, aware that their buildings are historic, and when they make changes to keep historic preservation in mind. So it's mainly an awareness program. And they're not on a target list. We're not going to take their property rights away, just an awareness program. And now the third thing is the survey of the Littleton Corridor is going to be done pretty soon, and we have to decide, we as a board, that's our charge. Now what do we do with it? Do we make a historic district? Do we use something else?
When will that be finished?
Should be finished by early next year.
January.
We're going to be running into the holidays, and so we want to do some outreach and some presentations. So we think we need to wait until the first year. The draft itself will be finished by the end of this year. So,
okay.
And we'll make comments and make changes.
So we might start thinking about that and what we do. And then updating the design guidelines. As you well know, the downtown design guidelines, and then we have the historical guidelines. It's very confusing to decide what fit these two. For example, the view house with the contributing, non-contributing, district, out of district, all this kind of confusing stuff. So that's actually been put from council to staff, and they're working on that, and it's going to be a phased-in project. Where we come in and where we'll need input is that we will have to approve this new guidelines and how we incorporate historical preservation in that. And so we'll need somebody from our group to maybe participate in a couple additional meetings. So just keep that in mind, something you want to do.
And just a quick thing, that the process for design guidelines is that the HPB board makes a recommendation to the Planning Commission, who approves all design guidelines.
And, okay, so we would have a liaison on that when they kind
Yes.
of come to fruition. And also, what's citizen involvement? is that, are the people who are actually in the district, property owners, what is their involvement?
Yes, well, we thought that we would like to have some citizen involvement and have someone come on board and discuss the issues with everyone else, get another perspective.
So an actual participant, somebody who is on the committee that's putting together the guidelines?
Yes, and then we, every planning project always has outreach. And so we would engage in some outreach as well before the board wants to make its recommendation to the planning commission.
So those are the high priority items, and that's HPV Preservation Board. So I would label that HPV at the top. And the next one is more like HPV and HLI. We've been asked to formalize our relationship with HLI and HPV. For example, they are now going to take the lead on the tours. It's education, it falls more in their preview, it's up and running. We will continue to provide the trainers if we want to participate. They've been working on identifying structures and contacting property owners for landmarking. And we thought maybe that they might be a good candidate to work on the plaques and to put on the outside the building. They would need to work with us and they would need to work with staff, but there's no funding, and they do have a little bit of funding, and we're talking about $128 a plaque. City can't seem to find a budget line item for it, but they might be able to do that. Maybe we could help them with a fundraiser like a house tour or something. I don't know what that looks like, but they want us to formalize it.
You know how many plaques are needed total?
We haven't got that far. It's a project that we've had on the work plan for a long time, and it just keeps getting pushed to the bottom, so we thought maybe that might be a way. We haven't even talked to HLI about this, so we would have to convince them.
Yeah, especially I would think if there is fundraising involved, it would be appropriate for them to do that and not us.
Right, and for example, they are going to fund microphones for our tours, so that we will only hopefully need 2 tour guides. One will go along the north, one will go along the south and point out buildings on the other side. So you won't walk the whole blocks both sides. So we just had a meeting with them on that. The next category is really ongoing. These are things that we're working on that are already on our radar screen: the grant program, the walking tours, meeting with Ludlam. And in fact, if we do anything in terms of moving more towards a mandatory opt-in, I don't know if we can get there, we might want to test it out on the Ludlam people and see what kind of reaction we get. I mean, it's just one idea. I'm not advocating it, just a thought. We do the Western Welcome Parade booth. We have outreach events as needed, and one of them is the Littleton meet and greet. So those are things we just keep in mind, but we don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting on them. Then the next one are maybe lower priorities or new projects or projects that would be in the future. And we've talked about providing a list of vendors and builders for historic updates that are specialized in historic preservation. We would not recommend them. We would do it like Denver does with some kind of disclaimer. These are just a list. We don't, stand behind them. And maybe we do some swaps with other HPB boards. We've done it in the past. It's been very interesting. Now that we have a tour, we might invite somebody here. If anybody maybe makes a contact, if they go to camp this year in February, that might be a good opportunity. Or
Yeah, no camp this year.
where is it?
It's every other year.
Oh, every other year. Okay.
But still, if you go to the conference.
Another thing that we've done, and you may not have a copy, some of you newer board members, is that we looked at alleys and how we might maybe build awareness. Right now, some of our property owners, the alley and the view house, have taken it on themselves. There's probably still some opportunities. It's nothing that we can obviously fund, but maybe something we can recommend, and maybe then turn it over to another group. Maybe that's an HLI thing. We looked at it and then we turned it over, I guess, to Planning Commission, and it never really made it there. So it's another thing to consider, not advocating, to consider. Because we want to do some more projects, maybe we work with somebody at CU, either an intern or somebody that is getting a degree in historic preservation, and maybe they become involved and work with staff. It probably has to be done starting in the fall or the springs coordinate their project. The bottom 5 things are really staff, they should be labeled staff.
I have a question about the intern. I believe that CU has a program where they will adopt a historic district and work with them for a year or a period of time and put resources towards it.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
So
Good
that
thing to
might,
look into.
So
Yeah.
we need to reach out, and Andrea has some contacts at the school. So, it's just a matter of priorities. If we say we're just burning to do this project, and we just don't have resources, maybe we do that. City website, of course, staff updates that, but when they're going to update it and update the historic preservation section, maybe we give input. We have that lovely one-pager that we all worked on that now for the community we can pass out. And if we could convert that to a brochure, that would be fabulous. We wanted to get signs for Arapahoe Hills, and then our meeting with the city council that we have twice a year. So that is a list of projects, just to start. So, first of all, is there anything missing that we want to add? And if we wanted to add that, where would we put it in this kind of format?
I have a question. Has Littleton looked at the Main Street program?
I don't know if you did years ago or not. My impression is we're beyond that, because I think they typically work with main streets which are really needing a huge infusion of energy and cash and knowledge. And I think that we've been so successful, and the property owners and the businesses have been so successful that I don't think that meets the best need. We certainly have thought about it, but I'm not sure it's the right minute for us.
Okay.
Paul, you have-
Just one clarification, it's for Arapahoe Hills, it's street signs and not entry signs. There's already an entry sign.
Isn't it covered over? So we don't need to do, what's the deal with the signs? So that's done?
No,
No, I think what Paul's saying.
we're talking about street signs.
It's a
either
street
a
sign,
topper
so-
or a new sign, or.
Yeah, on top of the street where it gives the name of the street, we put something additional on it that we've had in the past, and the thought is let's go ahead and do that. Although what we don't have is, and I think when we talk about entry signs, we're talking about something that says National Historic District. So that may be the entry sign part that we would do instead. Because I'm not sure the city policy is going to allow us to do the street signs differently at this point. So it may be just a really nice historic district black. The National Historic District is kind of consistent. So we can get something like that at each of the streets. And I think, yeah, it's like 7 different entries or points or something, as I recall, from having mapped it a little bit.
So the city won't allow different street signs or
I-
topper?
We can look and see. I
It's
think.
been a long time since we
Yeah.
checked in on that.
Yeah, it's been a year or so, I think, and they may have changed again. I'm not sure where we are with that. We'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, know what I can do to help.
Okay.
And I have a question also. Oh, I'm sorry.
Some
go ahead.
images and things. So
Okay,
also,
Thanks for clarifying. So we're looking at just the entry, National Historic District, and the street signs you'll look into.
Okay, yeah, figure that out.
One thing that I've heard from Hoodlum, and y'all probably have as well, is that all of the emphasis in historic preservation is all focused on, the Main Street. And it's if you set foot off of Main Street, it's you're out in a no man's land. So is there any thought, and you mentioned Alamo, and is there any thought of kind of moving up the street, especially with the historic post office?
Yes, I think that the board, a number of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we looked at the possibility of expanding Main Street Historic District, and I did a presentation at that time, and I'd be happy to pull that back out again. And what we did was we looked at the growth and change along Alamo Street. You may know that it originally started out as a residential street, and some of the nicest homes in Littleton back in the day were on Alamo. And then slowly, the commercial and industrial from adjacent areas started working their way onto Main Street. And so we kind of wound up with a bit of a hodgepodge, and not a lot of buildings that are necessarily ripe for preservation or would be eligible for landmark district. And so I think at the end of that presentation, it was concluded that really what was needed on Alamo was a vision for what it should be, and at the same time identify those individual buildings that are worthy of preservation, talk to the property owners, and see if we can get those preserved under the city's program. That was the conclusion of that, but that was 4 or 5 years ago.
Right, but there are other areas downtown, and we had an intern years ago that actually looked at individual areas throughout all of downtown, or the areas that could be individual districts or individual landmarks, and came up with a surprising list, I think. The other thing is that's what we're doing with the corridor study. The Route 1 corridor study is going to identify this would qualify as an individual district, this would qualify as contributing structure within a historic district, and I think the way the consultants are thinking at this point, I don't know where we'll end up, is thinking about recommending perhaps something like downtown Denver has, which is individual structures. There may not be enough continuity throughout downtown, but there's certainly enough outstanding structures.
As opposed to expanding the district itself.
Correct. With that continuity, it may be a district that doesn't have that contiguity would actually be individual structures that spread around. So, and that may be a good way to go too, so we'll have to kind of look at that and see.
I would throw that in what you were saying. Let's look at expanding the Main Street district. Maybe it's Alamo, maybe it's just a little bit.
Maybe it goes north instead of south.
I'm thinking it goes out. I don't know what you guys thinking. Just, it doesn't just do Main Street, that we go like a block out or something. I don't know.
Like it's north and south.
Yeah, this is just still brainstorming.
Well, it's interesting because when you look at it, you have a very cohesive district on Main Street, and then it becomes less.
It's a mix of residential and
Yeah.
commercial.
So, but if you look at it, this is a historic landscape. That kind of changes your thinking, so that you view it as that.
And there's certainly some structures that are adjacent to the district. The post office is adjacent to the
Yes.
district, and there's some other buildings that are adjacent to the district. The board might think about saying, should we approach those property owners and see,
The thing to consider is if you want to expand a district, create separate districts, the thing to consider about expanding the district is we're getting awfully close to our 2/3 in the expanded district, and that number's going to get really blown out of the water and probably never
Right.
obtainable.
I think we are at 2/3. I just did the math.
yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, you gave me the number 35 or 30 something out of 35 out of 654.
Yeah, I was thinking a little lower. Yeah, I think we're like 57%.
Oh, is it 57?
Yeah, I didn't
I was
remember the
thinking
name, I'm sorry.
55
Yeah.
I came close because the number we're always, 36 properties in the district out of 54. That's the numbers I had,
Okay, good.
which was 66%.
66.
So whatever we do with that, I think we have to think about some sort of ideas that we throw out to council and present it in a way that we want to kind of see. We'll have a new council, remember, see what they're thinking. We are one of the few opted districts in the United States. And if we could get maybe some backing, we just do a little research. I tried to do some online and I couldn't get those exact figures, but I bet you they have them at the Colorado Historical Society or something like that.
And I think Andrew knows that from previous research too, doesn't it? They need to be updated.
Opt-in districts?
Yeah.
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 Fruta?
Yeah.
Littleton and Fruta.
Out of the whole U.S. or out of
Colorado. Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, I would say, if we thought about expanding the district, which might not be appropriate, might be just more appropriate to kind of view it as that cultural landscape, I would highly recommend.
What do you mean view it as that district? I'm not understanding.
Well, the city paying attention to it, including it in tour type areas and things like that kind of thing. Get people thinking about it.
I think it needs some more bite.
Well, it probably does need more bite, but I don't think you're going to get more bite instantly. You know what I mean?
Right, but what I would like to think about is switch our thinking. Since we're at what we think is a tipping point, council may not agree, council will get all the feedback, but if we do our due diligence and find out from maybe starting at Hoodlum or starting with property owners, there's going to be pushback. But there was a lot of misinformation out there. that hopefully is no longer there. It's a different time than when it started. And I think it's worth a run or worth a different strategy. So,
Well, you know, Hoodlum is the one that primarily they talk about the fact that there's no attention paid to anything but this little strip in Main Street. And so, you know, it's certainly beneficial to them if the city of Littleton kind of turns attention and maybe resource towards, you know, expanding it out. So
I think it's a bigger issue, but it's what I'm advocating that we as the board look at things a little differently than trying to convince a property owner like we've been doing for the last, 5 to 7 years. And I've gotten, they come in because of the grant money.
yeah.
Would
And
be
the park,
interested-
The park
That's
was
right.
right.
And that would be an issue too, if we went to a non-opted district, would everybody have to get the parking waiver? And that would complicate things, which is, parking is out of our preview at a macro level. Other things that we need to add, and I think we need to add some of what we just talked about to that number 1.
Might be worthwhile polling building owners on Alamo or Littleton Boulevard or whatever areas we're trying to expand into and see if there's any interest. And if you get interest in building owners, that goes a long ways with city council.
And people in the expanded area, so people who are outside of the area
Yeah, on Alamo or
now.
Littleton
Sure.
Boulevard.
And Curtis, Nevada. It's
I think we should add that in too, to make sure that our process includes community feedback. Is there anything that you feel like is not worthwhile, that you want to take off, that you really want to push down a priority? Or switch priority?
Maybe just a clarification, Pam, on our top number 4 things. Number 2, Historic Building Awareness Program. How do you think we roll that out or implement that?
That's probably, I think what we talked about is looking at some of the surveys and identifying key structures, and then it would be some sort of packet or letter that would go to these building owners that when they do look to make updates, they consider some preservation.
Should we do that as board members then?
We probably work with staff, it's really a staff function.
Okay.
But as we talked about, maybe if people would be interested in volunteering, which I would do it, just to kind of help with some preliminary work or coordinate with a CU project. It's really led by staff, but I think there's involvement from us. And we would,
I'd like to just fill the board in on a couple of things that we are doing. You may know that we have about 900 surveys that have been done, and they were done in, 1998 and 2001, so they are older.
We're adding almost 100 to that with Littleton Boulevard.
Yeah, and so we have a computer program, and we will be adding each one of those surveys onto the applicable address. And so when property owners come in, they want to do a development, or perhaps they're inquiring about scraping their house or doing an addition. If the property has been surveyed, we have information that they may find very interesting and helpful to them.
It's not regulatory, it doesn't say they have to do anything, it's just information.
Informational, absolutely informational.
So that process, they come to the building department for a permit, and then that address flags something, and you provide them.
Based on experience, if someone gets that information at the time they're ready to pull a permit, it's too late.
Too late, so
Nevertheless, why not just give it as information? But it may be more helpful for projects that come through development review. Those are projects that need to get planning approval before the plans are actually drawn up. And so during those pre-application meetings that we hold with them, the information can come out and it can be discussed if they like, and they can move forward on something perhaps that honors or protects the historic resource.
I'd like to see if we could do some sort of awareness in anticipation of them making changes. Like you say, by the time they pull a permit, it's too late.
Yes.
no, you don't want anybody saying, oh, I had no idea.
Right. So we don't have much time. So any other changes to this work plan? We did it like I said, just to to provide a framework for discussion. So, given that, how much time do we have with city council?
I'm guessing we have an hour, but I don't know for sure. Have you heard a detail on
And
that?
part of that is eating? Is that our presentation? Or they come in and everybody's getting their food?
Part of that, yeah, that may be on top, I think eating would be on top of that.
Okay, so-
I would guess, but I don't know.
And
I haven't seen the
that's
final
next
agenda.
month? Is that right
It's in-
after the new city council is elected? So when are we going to go on? Like 11 o'clock at night?
No, it's just us, right?
It's just
7:30 in the
us.
It's a
morning.
breakfast again.
It's
Oh,
a breakfast.
okay, right,
Yeah.
all right, gotcha.
Okay, so
We'll have a new council member, so.
what,
Okay, gotcha.
just to remind you what we talked about last time, I pulled it, we talked about landmark designation project, you know, we're with HLI. We talked about the historic tours, now we have results. It was more like, this is a process. We talked about the grant program, we talked about the design guidelines, community outreach, Western Welcome, Hoodlum, summer picnics, and then we had asked them to give us their priorities, which we didn't hear much along those lines. So what do we want to talk to them about? I think we want to have some things that we mentioned.
Seems like we're like updating what happened, what our events were in 2017. Since if we're gonna have,
So-
if we're, I don't know, see how many new council members we have, and so it's sort of an educational process to them, to tell them what we do.
So do you want to, so does that mean we like review the COAs we've done? Is that one thing? I'm throwing this out.
I mean, you could say we've done, 6 COAs or however many COAs if you want, just to not necessarily go through
It's
every
like
single one.
success stories, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things I think that would be important is to, you always want to show results and value of what we do in historic preservation. And, we don't really have a lot of, I can tell you how much economic impact this provides to the city of Littleton. I mean, we don't have information like that, but we do have how many people, how we raised awareness. Like a year ago, citizens were not looking at these buildings. They weren't aware of the historic district. And the tours now have grown in popularity. And this is how citizens are finding out what the city is doing with the historic district. And, I think that's going to be very important, telling them what we do.
I agree, the COAs, city tours, and I've got all the stats on that.
Yeah, that's important. And just some of the responses that you get from citizens. There are some folks that are walking down memory lane and they're always sharing things that everybody else in the group enjoys hearing. And other people I had no idea, Littleton. These are people who live in Littleton that don't know about Littleton's history or the community, the historic district, or the historic property to Main Street, and they like it. And they like that the city is doing this. So, and we saw that at Western Welcome Week. We've seen it at the meet and greets, and also on the tours. But the tours have just really grown, and I think that's a real plus as far as awareness of all of this.
So I think we have the attorneys here, so we're going to need to wrap up fairly quickly here. So it sounds like,
I have one thing I'd like to add to what Kim is saying, sorry. I think one thing that we could point out is the enormous increase in sales tax revenue in the downtown area versus Littleton as a whole, and what historic preservation has done for that kind of revenue.
Absolutely. Can we just we're so close. We are so close to being done here. So that's not enough to build an agenda, unless you want me to build it for you, and I really don't want to do that.
Let's do the unused funds too. I'd be glad to put that together. See if the unused funds can be redirected. And Dennis and I we have worked on that before, but we can work on that, if you don't mind, Dennis.
Who wants to do a kind of a review of COAs? And Dan, and my thought is to talk, we've done 6 COAs. here's an example of what we've done, realizing we may have some new council members.
We can break that up and several members can, it's so that one person isn't doing all 6.
Well, wait until we see what else we've got. So we've got COAs, we've got the grant program. What about tours? Who wants to do that?
I'll do tours. Well, and then there's the meet and greets, and I was going to those, so I should.
So you should probably do.
I can do the tours.
Okay, Jolene's gonna do, or Jolene and Kim. Jolene, you'll do the tours? And
Yeah.
I've got stats for you.
Okay.
Okay, Jolene, do you want to do other outreach, Kim? Like, Hoodlum, Western Welcome, Littleton
Sure.
Increase? Okay, so I'll say,
Yeah, just increasing our profile. Are we allowed to make suggestions for the meet and greets and eats?
From our end at least, yeah, definitely, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if we can,
So we can't make a general comment about the meet and greet and eats? They don't want to hear that criticism?
I don't know, it's a good question.
I would work with Dennis on that.
Yeah, we can pass it through.
Okay, so,
Run it on the flagpole.
what about some of these other things, like things we plan to do, which maybe, work with staff in the awareness program, Littleton Boulevard, work with them, I mean, maybe we can group that as on future projects that we're working on as a group. You want to do that?
Sure,
Amy?
yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, so I'll write this all up and send it out, and give it time, so,
So that's Amy.
So I'm just
Yes.
doing outreach and
I'll work
awareness.
with
Yeah.
that.
future projects, and that's like 2 through 3. HLI. Do you,
I can talk a
Oh,
little bit
okay.
about our liaison with them.
HLI, that will be Mike. So we've got Mike doing, Amy's doing high priority 1, 2 through 3, so that's Amy. And then, Mike is doing HLI. Dan's doing grants, Dan's doing, COAs. You're doing grants, right, Mike? And then you'll do the rest of the outreach, Kim? Do we want to talk any more about future projects, like the resources, education, alley? And if you want, I can do that.
Yeah, I think we should definitely hit on Ally. Because,
Yes.
especially since, we had a COA that was requested for an alley project. And, we've got, this is a huge resource from Littleton.
It is, and it's going to take some work. We have to change the code as we amend the code, because it currently does not talk about public right-of-way. It just says streets when we're talking about
Yeah.
Jolene, what were you going to do?
design.
Tours. You're doing
We're
tours.
going to review as part of
Yeah.
the whole thing, so there's some great opportunities back there. We need to
Yeah,
think
it is
about
an
how we do it.
opportunity. It's great potential.
Okay, so I'll do the new stuff. What about number 1, increasing participation in the, do you want to kind of make that, is that something we all talk about, or kind of, what do you think? See where council lies with that, kind of maybe give them some history on what we've done in the past, and what, some ideas that we have going forward. Do they have any ideas? What direction
Yeah,
are
do
they?
they care? Get their temperature on it. They
Yeah.
may be like, well, it's great right now, just nothing.
Let me lead that discussion.
Yeah, and I think,
Okay.
I'm not comfortable about just saying, well, so what do you guys think about,
Well,
to
no.
just really look at, we are at, 57% or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then, we are aiming to increase the participation. And we are reviewing our strategies and seeing if we can be more effective in our presentation. And also, some of the folks who are now property owners or business owners, they might not have been around to hear the genesis of all of this, so.
I think you're exactly right on. I think we need to kind of give them some history, our thought process, and kind of it kind of outlines maybe some options that we're considering. and get their reaction. Now, they may look at us like, what? Because or they may have very fixed ideas or something in between. We don't know, especially with the new council.
Well, just briefly, I wouldn't include the Alamo piece of it, because I think that's where the focus is going to be. I would just talk about very simply revising the strategy and kind of, just presenting where we are, what this district is, what the benefit is. And I encourage everyone to take a new look at how this might positively impact.
And I think we can stress the 66%. Okay.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I will put together an agenda in some sort of order that makes sense, and I will probably not put that one first. That would be something after they get into preservation,
Right,
understand what it is a little bit, then we'll talk about it. So we'll organize it I'll organize it in such a way that, for example, COAs probably come first, I'm thinking, because that's our main focus of what we do, and then we'll talk about some of the other stuff, some of the other successes we've had. So David won't be able to be there. I don't know about Ted.
So this is 7:30 a.m.
7:30 a.m. Thank you, everyone. And if any thoughts come up, this is a living document.
One other thing, I think you need to talk about the fact that you've got the design guidelines.
The what?
The design guidelines for Laughlin.
Oh, yes.
And approved, so.
Dan, do you want to put that under your accomplishments with COAs?
I was just going to talk to you later. I'm actually have a flight at 10 o'clock Thursday morning.
Oh, so you're not going to
be able to do it.
You won't.
So I'm happy to put together a COA presentation if somebody, you can,
I can
click,
run
click,
through
click,
it. If
click,
you can
click,
put it
yeah.
together, I can.
Yeah.
And
Happy to
Laughlin,
help
okay,
out.
so we will have PowerPoint.
Yes.
If we do
It'll be
have
here.
PowerPoint, I'll need to know, I think what we should do is put it together all in one PowerPoint, instead of everybody getting up there with individual presentations. So if you could let me
Send it to
know.
us.
Yeah, send it to Andrea like a week
Sure.
in advance.
Yep, that's good.
Okay, so it's what's the date again, the 16th, so
16th.
by the 8th?
Good.
So by November 8th, if you would have your PowerPoint to Andrea, so she can incorporate them all, and Andrea, I'll give you an order that I think makes sense. And if you think you want to change it, just let me know so people can do it. And you won't have unlimited time. I'll kind of give you, we'll put together agenda with time.
So how many of us are presenting?
I can do the COAs if you want.
Oh, would you do that?
Yeah, that'd
Would
be
you-
great.
Okay, yeah, that's better.
That would be great.
Okay. Okay, yeah, and then Laughlin too, just,
Sure.
Okay, so are you going to work with Dan, or how are you going to do it?
Yeah.
You guys figure it out.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. And thank you for the extra couple minutes. We really appreciate it. And I think that's it. We're good? Okay. Is it in this room?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, this is the 9th or the 16th?
16th. But if you have a PowerPoint, if you would get that to Andrea by the 8th.
When will this be over? 7:30 until when?
9 to 9.
9, okay, that's good.
Slide, this is the list. Slide. Good job, Jim.
I think it'd be good. The one on the right was mine, the one on the left was here, so. Either
Want
one.
to take a break so that we can set this up?
Sure. Yeah.
Where's down? Where's
You wanna,
Take a break and then turn off.
Pam, we're gonna need a few minutes to.
Oh, like what, how long break do you want?
5-minute break.
Oh, you can take a 5-minute break.
I have a question. So I have
So that everybody know this.
Good evening. This is basically what we've been doing with a number of boards and commissions in terms of providing some training about what roles and responsibilities are. And Raina McClellan, who is the Assistant City Attorney in the City Attorney's Office, will be doing most of this, but there will be times when I may join in. And it's a pleasure to be here tonight. So with that,
And would you refresh us on your name again, please? Or is it on?
Steve Kemp.
This is Steve Kemp, the city attorney.
Steve Kemp? No, I know, but I couldn't. Oh, thank you. I couldn't remember your name.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. We are going to be just doing a little, just a very basic legal training, talk a little bit about the Historic Preservation Board's roles, in their relationship and their roles to staff, their role to City Council. We're going to talk a little bit about meetings and public meetings. And if you have any questions along the way, please do not hesitate to ask. And I will try to make this as quick and painless as possible. So we'll start with talking about the role of the Historic Preservation Board. As you probably, I hope, know, the roles are laid out in the Littleton Municipal Code, in particular in section 4-6-6. So you can see the list of the different roles that your board has, reviewing properties that are nominated for a designation as historic landmark, historic districts, and making recommendations as to such to City Council, reviewing and providing comments and recommendations on nominations of properties to the National Register of Historic Places, assisting in public education programs, namely those being your walking tours and things like that, reviewing and issuing certificates of historic appropriateness, advising City Council on matters relating to the historic character of the city, and making recommendations to the Planning Commission on things like design guidelines, for example, your Loudoun Historic Guidelines that were just completed. So a little bit about the role of City Council compared to the role of a board like HPB. City Council is our local legislative authority. They're the ones who ultimately set the policies and laws related to land use and, in particular to you, historic preservation in the city. They adopt and amend the historic preservation section of the city code, and they have the power to appoint the members of the HPB. And in most circumstances, your relationship to City Council is going to be advisory in nature. The role of your wonderful support staff. They are going to be responsible for processing and reviewing the certificates, the COAs, before they come before the board. They schedule all of your hearings and meetings. They do all the noticing for public hearings. They prepare all of those wonderful staff reports that you get to read before your meetings. They take care of the minutes and the records, and they provide you with other assistance as necessary. So talk a little bit about the role of city charter and city code. So our city charter is basically our local version of a constitution. It establishes the framework for governance in the city. The city code is what I would liken to your statutes. It's going to establish law and policy, for example, on historic preservation within the city. And as some of you may or may not know, as a home rule city, we can enact laws that differ from the state unless the state has preempted local governments from doing so on that topic. So as you guys just went through dealing with some guidelines, the Louthan guidelines, just a little refresher on what those are. They are intended to be sort of administrative rules that help guide you on how the policies are to be implemented and applied. They're generally, as you know, more technical than subjective, and they provide applicants and staff with direction. And in areas such as historic preservation that this board is going to deal with, these are going to be specific information on how to comply with city policies. They provide diagrams, specifications, and tables for technical professions such as architects, engineers, and planners. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit into meetings. So all authorities, boards, and commissions in the city are governed by the City Council legislative rules. As a member of this board, you are responsible for reviewing and understanding this document. It is available on the city's website. If you go to the City Council tab, you can find it there. These rules include the order for meetings and certain what we call parliamentary rules on how to run a meeting. But the city follows a more relaxed version of what's known as Robert's rules, and so it's sort of more of like a Bob's rules. So a little bit less formal, which is great for all of us, because I don't know if you've ever tried to read Robert's rules, but it's not exactly the easiest thing to follow. Oh, now got some animation. As a general rule, there are 2 stages to your meetings. You're going to have a fact-finding stage and a deliberation stage. In your fact-finding, this is going to be where the staff, the applicant, and other interested parties are going to present to you. And at this point, you should be keeping a neutral and fact-finding mindset and asking only clarifying questions, and really trying to avoid making any position statements at this point. And then in your deliberation stage, obviously this is going to be your decision-making stage. This is going to be the point where you're discussing amongst each other, making any statements of position that you might have, and stating your reasons for doing so. I don't know if you have anything to add, Steve, at this point.
The important thing in the deliberation stage is each of you were appointed bringing your own unique and different backgrounds. Sometimes, particularly in things that are what we call quasi-judicial, where you're acting as a adjudicatory board where you're actually making a decision, much like judges, people think, well, we have to have consensus, and that is absolutely false. In a quasi-judicial phase, it's much like when I've been in front of courts of appeals. You'll have 3 judges, and I have had many a decision where I'll have a dissenting judge who will simply say, I disagree with my 2 fellow judges. That's not how I see it. And it's perfectly appropriate in the quasi-judicial type items that we'll talk about for board members to disagree. I've had the historic preservation boards that voted on a 4-3 vote in other jurisdictions. And on quasi-judicial matters, that's appropriate. Many times in legislative matters, you may try to come to some kind of consensus. But the important thing is in a quasi-judicial matter, it's like each of you put on a black robe and become a judge. And the most important thing is you should bring your own impartial background to that discussion.
So that segues very nicely into talking about your quasi-judicial role. And as we said, this is when you get to wear your cape and your wig and be judges. So you're wearing your quasi-judicial hat. What is that going to mean? So when are you going to be wearing this hat, or in this case, wig? Particularly, these are your COA hearings. So in your case, as a board, that's going to be the only place that you guys will be wearing that wig or hat. In other boards, they may have more circumstances where they have a quasi-judicial role. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the guidelines for a quasi-judicial hearing. So the parties in a quasi-judicial hearing are going to be the city, the applicant, that's going to be the person, obviously, or entity whose property interests are directly involved, and then some things to consider before your meeting. We'll talk a little bit about ex parte communications. So one thing that's important as a quasi-judicial board, when you're in that role, is really being careful about keeping that neutral mindset. And one thing that can break that is if you have communications with parties outside of or before the hearing, because you're trying to really keep a neutral mindset. So trying to avoid having these ex party communications before you have these meetings. So one other thing to think about is when we talk about things like site visits and investigations and expert opinions. We've talked a little bit, I think, about site visits in the past, but we are working on having a more formal policy, I think, is where we ended when we talked to Planning Commission about this as well. But right now, I think we're at the point where we would just like you to keep us informed about when you do things like undertake individual site visits.
It's important that needs to be disclosed in the record. Now, all of you live in this community, and pretty much this is not a big community. It's 14 square miles. So the reality of it is, most of the cases before you, you've probably seen at one time or another. And there's no way any more than a judge is able to clear their mind of what they already know, neither can you. But if you were to say, oh, a case has been filed, I want to go out and walk around that site, then it becomes important that you disclose that as part of the proceedings so it's in the record. Because as a judge, you have to be impartial. And if, just like a judge, when I try a case, if the judge has seen evidence that no one knows, that's actually a violation of the judicial rules because the judge has lost their impartiality. So the key thing on site visits is that you just simply need to be prepared to disclose those. So those are part of the record. And that can be done at the meeting. Yes, I just want the record to show that I did go out, I inspected the site, and this is what I found.
So we should include that as part of our proceedings.
If you've been out on the site, yes, you should indicate that.
Often what happens is that people will go visit the site on the way to the meeting, and we haven't emphasized this, that you're not supposed to stand there with the person, another HPB member, and say, what do you think of that? What do you think of that? You go, you look, you don't speak,
yes.
and then you leave.
You definitely, if more than one person goes to the site, you should not be having conversations regarding the matter because you are creating the possibility of violating what we call the Colorado Sunshine Law, which is our version of an Open Meetings Act here in Colorado. And so you definitely, if you go to the site and say there's 3 of you there, you should not be talking about the matter.
As I recall, Pam, too, I think part of that direction we got was don't talk to people on site either. Don't talk to the contractor.
Right. Just look.
Just look.
And the only reason that we might have more than one person, I mean, somebody goes on a Saturday before, is that people tended to go right before the meeting, and sometimes you ran into somebody. But we were always very careful not to chat. We just kind of, looked around and got back on.
The important thing to remember when you're talking about public hearing and your quasi-judicial role is just maintaining that impartiality and just remembering that you are wearing that judge's hat, and so you need to remain impartial, and you need to be having the image projected that you have not made a decision already. So that is the important thing to remember in that circumstance.
So you're not discouraging site visits, but if you do, we need to disclose
Yes.
ahead of time. So it seems like I think where you're going is in our procedure, hey, did anybody go see the site?
Yes.
Okay,
And
and then we have to say, yeah, we did, or we have to,
And that's also the time when if you have any other disclosures that you need to make, that would be the appropriate time to do so.
I
Like
guess
a
from our-
conflict of interest or something.
Right.
Yes.
And I guess from our perspective, it's beneficial for the board to go to the site and look and get the context of what the discussion is.
So we're making an informed decision.
Right.
So that's not a problem, because one thing, I walk in downtown Littleton quite frequently, and a lot of times if we have renderings and things like that, I'll actually, look at it and say, oh, I wonder what, okay, that's the orientation and all of that. That's not like a site visit, because I'm walking someplace else. Is that okay?
That's not really a site visit when we're talking about that. That is actually a formal sort of walk around the site. That's the subject of a hearing.
So
The
mine's
fact-
just a casual pass
and
by.
the fact is I walk all over, and I'm likely to see something that's gonna come before the city council. I can't close my eyes when I walk, and the law doesn't require that.
Right, and it's,
It does require, though, that you consider only things in the record. So if you do a formal site visit, it becomes really important that become part of the record and it's disclosed.
And I don't think we've been as good about that. So, okay, we'll do that.
so like I said, you must be fair and impartial decision makers. And so then, like we talked about, this sort of leads into the discussion of disclosures. This is the opportunity that you disclose things like, I did a site visit, the applicant is my uncle, I do business with them, I need to step down, they cornered me in the frozen food section of the grocery store. This is the opportunity to make sure that information that needs to be shared is shared on the record so that everyone has the same level playing field. And if you have any questions about whether something requires a disclosure, a great opportunity is to come down before the meeting and talk to myself or another attorney that's present, and we will walk through whether or not we think that rises to the level of something that needs to be disclosed. Because if it's so tenuous that nobody would accuse you of having partiality, then maybe it's not really something you need to disclose, but we can help you walk through that if you have any questions. So please don't hesitate to ask. So we talked a little bit about the order of proceedings. You guys do this all the time, so you're very familiar with the way this goes. Obviously, we start with our staff presentation. Your staff will give you a little presentation on the COA, on what the particular guidelines are that apply. At this point, obviously, as you know, you're encouraged to ask questions or raise issues with staff. Then you'll have the applicant's presentation. Again, you're encouraged to ask questions, but like I said before, keep them in the fact-finding realm. Then we're going to open your public hearing. At this point, if you have any members of the public that are there to express their opinions, they'll do this at this point. Generally, there is the opportunity if the parties want to make or present any rebuttal to anything that has been said, then they should have the opportunity to do so. Then the hearing will be closed, and at this point would be the point when the chair would entertain a motion from the other members of the board to bring something to the table, and then we can have discussion.
I have a question, suggestion, and you may say no, but reading this article, they talked about how if you go straight from closing to a motion, it almost appears like you're making a decision when you aren't, you haven't had any discussion. So then, now something's on the table. It's like getting a presentation and saying, I move we accept that proposal.
Well, I will, I'll just interject really quickly. So a motion to, doesn't mean that you're stuck with that motion. So just because you bring a motion and the motion is to approve, it's just to get that on the table so that you can have discussion. So you can always vote against it.
I understand that. I understand that, and I know that's Robert's Rule of Order, because I looked it up. And I understand from your perspective, but from our perspective, we've got a stake in the sand. Somebody may feel, well, I really don't agree, but there's stake in the sand, and we're all going for this motion. It's a discussion hindrance, and I don't think it helps us make good decisions.
So I will just say that we are supposed to follow the order that City Council does, and City Council brings a motion and then discusses. So
Then what I suggest to the group is that knowing that we will pick, that Kim may say, I approve it, this is my motion. Knowing that does not preclude us having discussion and coming up with whole new motions,
and absolutely
right?
not. And as we have told, Brandon and I have told you before at meetings, we want you to discuss it. We want you to lay out the reasons why you are for or against it, because we want to build that record. Should someone challenge your decision, we want to be able to point to that record to say that you have all discussed it in detail. And we obviously want you to discuss it, and we don't want you to feel tied to make a decision one way or the other because of the motion that was brought forward.
Which we've been lackadaisical before, so we just have to realize that doesn't preclude us from coming up with something totally new, denying it with caveats, that it's just for purposes, in my opinion, of Robert's Rule of Order.
And I would tell you, I recently had a board where the initial motion was made to start discussion. That motion, after there had been discussion, was called for a vote and was rejected. And it was the fourth motion that was made that the board finally came to a decision. And it was just the initial motion. After there was discussion, the board became more and more aware that this really wasn't the direction it wanted to go, and it wanted to approach the issue in a different way. And that frequently happens. I've testified in front of legislative bodies in a number of jurisdictions, and it is very, very common that motions are made, amendments are made to motions, amendments are voted on and they fail, and sometimes the motion fails because literally that final action is an action that the majority of this board approves.
So do we have, once the motion's on the table, we're going, let's say we're going a different direction, do we have to vote down that motion? And then after discussion, we can make a new motion?
You can either, it depends on whether, if it's just amending the motion and the amendment is, the fancy legal term is germane, but what it really means is that the amendment relates to the motion. If the amendment relates to the motion, you can amend the motion and then vote on it. Sometimes it's clear that you want to go 180 degrees differently and you cannot amend the motion in any way, shape, or form. So then you vote down the original motion and then you entertain a second motion.
Which is different than the way we've been doing things.
Yes.
So just be aware that this is the way things, that a motion is going to come up right away.
And the easy way to do that is use the motion that
Yeah,
is
it's already
provided to
there.
staff.
Well, I have a question about that, because oftentimes it seems that we open our discussion, you have to put a motion on the table, and it's a very long and complex and specific motion. Would it be possible to have a very simple motion, like, just throw it out, I move to approve this, and open it for discussion?
Many times, like the city council, the initial motion is fairly straightforward. It would be a motion to approve the execution of an intergovernmental agreement with blank metro district.
My only concern with that is in the context of COAs, there's very specific criteria that needs to be met, so I would just caution you, if you choose to do it that way, that you make sure that that criteria is discussed because it's very specific.
Ordinarily in the presentation, the motions are listed there, so those would probably be the motions that we would make.
We could just read that.
And generally,
Correct.
those are fairly straightforward. It's 4 criteria, and they're either met or
I think just to
Not.
cover all our bases, and we just read whatever one, but we need to know that that doesn't mean we're fighting for or against, and we don't have leeway to come up with a
It's
new
just an
motion.
open discussion.
And then do we have to, if it seems that we are not going to go in the direction of the motion on the table, we want to consider something different, do we have to vote it down?
Yes.
Or can the person simply, withdraw the motion?
Yes, the movement and second can the second can withdraw their second, and the movement can withdraw the motion. And many times that will be done, and then a new motion is substituted. Now, once the question is called by the chair, and this gets into kind of another technical side of Robert's rules, or even Bob's rules for that matter, but once the chair calls the question, then you must vote on the motion. The moment that's done, there's no ability for the movement and second to withdraw. You must vote. And then if the motion fails, then the chair entertains a new motion. It's made, seconded, and discussion begins anew until the action item is resolved.
And in final follow-up to that, is one preferable to the other? Is it preferable to just vote it down or have the motion withdrawn?
No, I mean, the minutes are going to show it either way. And the key, particularly when you're functioning in a quasi-judicial position, is what we need is a record that shows that there was a motion made, there was discussion, the criteria for the decision were set out, and the board in making its decision followed those criteria. Usually a quasi-judicial decision that is overturned, it's overturned because the reviewing body, in this case the district court, is simply unable to determine from the record that there was any review of the relevant criteria and that they were considered in the action.
I think for clarification and ease, it may be easier if if it hasn't been called to just withdraw the motion. Certainly, in some cases, can be cleaner than trying to vote it down and then bring a new one and,
That's providing the person who put it on the floor
wants
is
to
willing
withdraw.
to do that, because they may not,
Yes, in which case
we may
you
need to
would
vote
then
it
have
down.
to vote it.
And that happens.
Yes.
So does that motion have to be approval or denial, or can it be a motion to discuss?
No, the motion, when a motion's made, a motion is moving in action. So it's really, you can't really make a motion to discuss because that's not action. It's moving a specific action. The discussion's just a result of the motion. And
Because in the past, motions have been made to approve, I think, way too early,
And
prior
now-
to discussion.
Now you know why. We have to do it that way.
Yeah, but that's, in my opinion, resulted in poor decision-making.
I think you just have to understand that you're not bound to that, and you're bringing a motion to the floor so that you have an action that you can discuss. So you're making a motion to approve or deny so that you have an action to discuss. So once you bring that motion to approve or that motion to deny, then you discuss why or why not you feel that you should vote for or against that motion.
I've actually been in front of legislative bodies where someone will move it and they'll say, I'm moving this to bring it to the floor so we can discuss it, but I intend to vote against the motion.
Oh.
And that happens very frequently.
Yeah.
where,
It's just a means of getting it on the floor so that you can discuss it. And you just need to know that once you make the motion and you have that opportunity for discussion, that you need to take your time. because these decisions matter. So it is very important that you walk through the criteria and the guidelines that are relevant to that COA and explain why you're making the decision that you are making. So it's very important that you take that step back and take your time.
I think where we got in trouble, Paul, is that we were lackadaisical and we went straight to discussion, and then we were kind of highly encouraged to put a motion before discussion, and that's not the way we had been doing things. I think that's what happened.
So if you put this in your notebook, make sure that on this page 15, this business about collaboration and so forth, before a motion, cross that out, so that if you refer to that 6 months from now and said, hey, man, we got this from the city, it says this can discourage consensus, so what should we do? So let's just make sure that if we're going to follow that rule, we follow it. And you know that.
And don't vote yes in the first motion because
Yeah, knowing that we have to have a motion regardless, and it's not a statement.
And like Steve mentioned before, I think consensus is great if you can come to it, but you are all on this board because of your individual backgrounds and expertise, and we don't expect you to agree all the time, and you don't. And that's okay. And like you said, judges, when they sit on a panel, do not agree. I mean, you probably don't spend your time like we do reading Supreme Court decisions, but they are very often, 5-4 with 4 dissenting opinions, but all joining each other's dissenting opinions. There are often plurality decisions, so you are not required to be in consensus all the time. Now, as Steve mentioned, when you're acting in more of your legislative role, then we do encourage consensus because that's something you're maybe talking about, guidelines that you're bringing forward to the Planning Commission. It's always better if you all are on the same page about those. But when it comes to your quasi-judicial role, we don't expect nor require you all to agree with each other. And certainly there could be circumstances where one of you feels very strongly that a COA shouldn't be given, and that's okay. So.
Oh, I had one more question, sorry. We have public comment. What is the procedure for engaging the public? Can we ask them questions, and when is it appropriate to do that, or?
Yes, I mean, when the public is there, the public is testifying. Now, in some states, the public's actually put an oath. In Colorado, that is not generally done. There's nothing that says you couldn't do it. It's just, even though our proceedings are quasi-judicial, our courts have not required that. If you were in Washington, on the other hand, they would actually put you under oath. So yes, the board can ask questions, but the questions need to be related to the testimony given. If someone is testifying, and I'm going to use a well-known example about, we have a hearing on a certificate of appropriateness, and they suddenly wanted to get into a long discussion about how terrible the groves are. That is not part of any record, it's not part of anything, and it would be improper for board members to start questioning about something that's not part of the record.
That brings up a point that we had in one of our meetings, and I don't know if I handled it correctly, but during a break when we had a COA, one of the members of the public actually came forward up to where we were sitting and wanted to talk outside of the public comment. Now, what I did is said, you can't be here. Let me finish my conversation. You can't be here. Let me finish. I mean, that's not my job. We're supposed to work well with the public.
That's exactly the proper thing to do, because otherwise you're now taking testimony that's not part of the record. If a member of the public comes up, you must say, I'm sorry, if you wish to testify, you have to testify as part of the public hearing. We cannot consider any testimony except that which is in the record.
And I think if you just try to be firm and clear with them and make sure that they understand that anything they're telling you is not going to make a difference, because you cannot take any testimony that is not a part of the public record.
So that's up to all of us as board members. If you were on a break and you walk to the restroom and somebody starts grabbing you, that's what we need to say, I guess.
Right, and like I said before, you can't, I mean, you all live in this community and you can't avoid people. I mean, you're gonna go to the grocery store and you're gonna see someone. And so if they corner you in the frozen food section, you just have to do exactly that. If you have something you'd like to say about this, please come and testify at the public hearing. I can't take any testimony that's not made at the public hearing. I can't take anything that's not from the record. I can't discuss this with you, you know, and I think just being pleasant but clear, you know, that's all that you can do in that circumstance.
But I can recommend some good green beans for you.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
If you have a situation where we as a board have another question for the applicant, can we reopen the public hearing to ask that question? And is that how we'd have to do it?
Yeah, normally what will happen is at the end of the public hearing, you'll be calling backup staff and you'll be calling the applicant. And you can ask the applicant additional questions during that time. You can even, the applicant usually then gets a final opportunity to make their case. And normally questions in that summary are not asked to staff and the applicant. But when the applicant comes back up after the public hearing, they're fair game, ask away.
Well, we've closed the public hearing, and the attorneys don't like it. We've had to reopen it before in order to ask a question.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like occasionally I've tried cases where we were almost ready to do closing arguments, and one side or the other will ask the court to allow additional testimony to be taken. It happens sometimes.
Steve, correct me if I'm wrong though, if you reopen the public hearing, then everybody gets a chance again. So then, if the public wants to come back and testify again, you have to allow them.
Yes,
Once you've reopened that public hearing, you can't just open it for only the people you want to talk to.
Everybody who wants to testify gets to
Right.
and testify.
So just keep that in mind.
So I mean, it's fairly, in public hearings before governing bodies like this, it's fairly rare to do that. I've had it happen, and I won't say it never happens because I've had it happen, but it's a rare thing. Normally, you've taken the public testimony, you then ask the staff to come back up. The staff you generally will be asking the staff questions about the public testimony you've just heard, and then you'll ask the applicant to come up, and you'll be asking the applicant questions about the public testimony that you've just heard. And then at that point, you really will be closing the public hearing, and you'll just be accepting final argument from staff and final argument from the applicant.
Talk briefly about your legislative role. So you are going to wear this hat when you do things like assistant public education programs, like your historic walking tours, Western Welcome Week, when you advise City Council on matters related to the historic character of the city, and when you make recommendations to Planning Commission on your design guidelines that have to do with historic preservation. The last role or hat that you may wear is your regulatory. I call this one the Smokey the Bear hat. You're going to wear this one when you're doing things like reviewing properties that are nominated for designation and making recommendations, and reviewing and providing comments on properties to the National Historic Register.
Now again, with the regulatory hat, it becomes much more important, unlike the legislative hat. But the legislative hat, consensus building in that is very important. The regulatory hat, you're functioning much like a regulatory agency on the state or federal level. And your decision can be challenged, so it's important there that you as a body comply A, with the code, and B, that you base your decisions upon your expertise as a body. And by that I mean that if you're making a recommendation on nominations of a property to the National Register, you don't want to have the decision, oh, well, we think this is a really nice property. You want to be able to say, well, in looking at this, the staff told us that this property was built in 1922. There was the first high school built in the city of Middleton. It was built to a what was known as a Greco-Roman style at that time. There are only 3 other buildings that we've identified in Middleton that has a similar style. And for all these reasons, it's sufficiently unique that it would warrant in our recommendation that it be on the National Register of Historic Places. That type of record, what that does is if there's a challenge, a court's able to go back and say, well, wait a second. This is the reviewing agency for this purpose. They've itemized, based on their expertise, the reason for this regulatory decision. And the courts are required to give your decision what they call due deference. That they're not to go and say, well, we disagree with that. We could have drawn a different conclusion. A court isn't permitted to do that. A court has to give your decision deference because you're the regulatory agency. And it can only basically overturn your decision if it finds it's one of 3 things. And these are all fancy legal terms, so we'll simplify. The first is what we call arbitrary. Arbitrary, the best way of describing it, is unthinking. It's simply a decision made without any regard to the facts of law. You just did it because you could. The second is what the law calls unreasonable. And again, that's a fancy legal term. What it really means in common sense language is you had no reason. You just did it because you wanted to. And the last word is capricious. Capricious is another fancy legal term. What it simply means is that you looked at no facts. You simply did not, even though there were facts in front of you, you simply didn't look at them. You just rendered a decision because you could, without looking at any facts. Now, a reviewing court can overturn a regulatory decision for those reasons. So the important thing is you're always looking at the facts. And you're saying, based on our judgment as a regulatory entity, we're basing our decision on the facts that we find in front of us.
Further questions? Well, you got us here.
I have one, Lena. Staff is going to be in the process of combining the historic guidelines with the downtown guidelines. Will there be and I guess those will have to be, I'm kind of thinking out loud, those will have to be adopted then by what, planning and the council? So as long as we've got the guidelines in place, those are the ones we're going to follow until the new guidelines. So,
Yes.
I look back at trying to look at each piece of it and how a COA fits with that.
We won't have any approval of it, we would just have input.
Make a recommendation.
Okay, so think about it. It's not necessarily have to be an architect, but I think we want at least one architect to give input, and then we could have somebody that's not an architect. Is that what you're recommending? And when you get started on this project, which may be some off meetings.
We're trying to really bring about, we have if you look at the guidelines, there's district guidelines, there's sub-district guidelines. Some of the sub-district guidelines actually conflict with the district guidelines. So what we're really trying to do is to create a structure, which is what you find in most jurisdictions. You would have, so at the bottom of the pyramid, which are guidelines that may apply across all districts, design districts, or even sometimes citywide. And then you have a second structure, which is design guidelines that apply across the entire district. And then you have your sub-district guidelines, which are at the top of that structure, which are unique to the sub-district. And that's really the aim here, is to get to something that where if I'm an applicant, I know that the bottom level, everybody has to comply with. I can then look at the district guidelines and know I have to comply with those because I'm in that particular district. And then I may be in a particular sub-district, and I know I have to comply with those.
I have a question about when the public comes to comment, they say their name and where they live. Is it required that they give their address?
They can give the district they live in. We will accept that. They don't have to give their specific address.
So,
We're just trying to make sure that they, so the purpose of that is to make sure that they live in the city, so that they're testifying because they have a connection to this city, or they have a relevant connection to the to the whatever is at hand in the public hearing. So oftentimes we'll have testimony, like one of the other boards I assist with is the licensing authority, and we'll have testimony by, you know, the manager or the person doing the survey or the, you know, petition, and obviously they don't necessarily live in the city, but they may come, you know, down and give their testimony. So it's just to give us some relevance to who they are and what connection they have to the situation.
And many times people just indicate, I live in District 1 or I live in District 3. Now, the only exception to that will be the applicant.
Yes.
The applicant and their representative are expected to give their business address because that's actually part of the official record. But other than the applicant and their representative or their lawyer, many times people will say, well, I live in District 1 or I live in District 3.
But they can't refuse to.
They need to identify at least that, because it's a relevant factor for you to consider. If I live in Englewood and I come here and I'm testifying, that doesn't mean that you can't consider it.
Right.
But you may say, well, gee, I weigh this resident of Littleton's testimony as having more credibility because they live here versus someone from Englewood who just has an abiding interest in history.
Maybe we should say that if they don't, for some reason, don't want to give their address. I'll make a note.
Yeah, and we're not requiring that they give us their. They don't have. I mean, some people do. They don't have to give us their street address. You know, I understand the reasons that somebody would maybe not want to do that.
I have a question. Supposing board member reads the packet over the weekend and has a question, perhaps technical or about criteria, and would like to know the answer to that prior to the meeting beginning. Okay to call staff?
Well, if they call staff and staff answers that, staff needs to provide that answer to all of the members, because otherwise we've now had ex-parte communication. For example, I've over the years had a council member who's occasionally come down and talk to staff. And that's fine, but then we've had to say to that council member, please understand, this is going to be provided to all of council, because otherwise you have engaged in ex-parte communication, and that taints a quasi-judicial proceeding.
I'll give you a very recent example. I am working on something for City Council right now, and prior to first reading at the last City Council meeting, I had a City Council member email me and ask me a specific question, and in my response email, I CC'd every other member of Council. So now everybody has the same piece of information that the council member who asked me the question has.
And that's generally the appropriate process, whether it's quasi-judicial, regulatory, or legislative, because council members don't exist as individual office holders. They exist as a governing body, and their authority comes from acting as a body. So when we advise them, we advise a body.
And then the same goes for the Historic Preservation Board. We advise you as a body, not as individual members. So please feel free to ask staff questions. Just know that those questions will not remain anonymous, or the answers will not remain anonymous.
Well, I would just throw out that I find that the assistance and guidance that y'all provide during the meeting to be incredibly helpful. I mean, you just really steer us and keep us on the right track.
Yes, however, sometimes the constant interruption is difficult. Not that you're going to stop it or not going to change it, but when you try to go forward and you're constantly interrupted as chair, it's often difficult. So like I say, it's not going to change what you do. Just be aware, maybe in terms of timing, to make sure that we haven't done what you're supposed to do before there's interruptions.
I will certainly take that in consideration. The only thing I would say is we don't often know what you're going to do before you do it. So there's no sense in interrupting you if you're not going to do something.
But then we may be getting to it too until we moved on, so I mean, it's a fine line.
I will say that if we sense you are heading in a direction, we try to stop you before you get there, but like I said, we are unable to know that you're going to do something before you actually do it. And oftentimes we have to interrupt because if we let you go forward, it only snowballs. So we're just trying to stop you, head you at the pass if we can. I realize sometimes it can be disruptive, but we will take that into consideration.
Thank you. Thank you.
And do our best to anticipate.
That's all I ask. That's all I ask.
Well, I want to say thank you again for giving us this opportunity. One of the things I'm committed to as city attorney is making sure we give all of our boards good advice, but B, that we also work with all of our boards to help you be as efficient in your responsibilities as you can. And this is one of the things, we've done this now with a number of boards, and it's just a pleasure to be here. You normally don't see me because we divide responsibilities between Maynard, myself, and then we have a contract prosecutor. So you probably won't see me on many occasions, but it's truly a pleasure to be here today.
And also in the future, if you have any any other sort of trainings or areas that you would like from myself having to do with legal, please let me know because I'm happy to provide them to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Before we adjourn as a group, just let's make sure we're all on the same page. Kind of just a recap. So I think we're pretty clear on the agenda that we're going for our next meeting with City Council. I will send that out to staff, which will send it to everybody. If there's any changes, let me know. And if you can let me know one-on-one, and then I can resend it. There's no meeting with Planning Commission. We'll reschedule that. Do we have any COAs for next month?
No.
So there's a good possibility we may not meet in November, and maybe December, depending on what's going on. And since we did our other work, our non-COA work, I don't know that we need to meet in November. If there's some job on here or committee or something that you have a passion about, please let me know, and so we can start having you become involved in whatever that is. Does that make sense? So if you really want to work on, let's say, plaques with HLI, let me know, and I'll put you in touch. And Mike's our liaison, but he might not necessarily do plaques, and I'll put you in touch with Gail and all that kind of stuff. Anything else before we adjourn?
I have a quick question about the presentations on the 16th. How long do you think we want to be talking?
We'll get clarification on that from Jocelyn.
Oh, okay.
I'm guessing, unless you've heard otherwise, probably, I imagine we have an hour with council too. We might have more than that.
This presentation might be shorter to allow this
Right.
discussion.
Yeah.
Discussion.
My-
Exactly, so, yeah.
Andrea and I just roughed out what it would be, and I came up with 35 minutes of content, no questions and answers. So if you figure, for example, I thought we would do some sort of introduction to the roles and responsibility, and I'd love her first couple slides if I can get those. And then COAs would probably be the biggest. So Paul might talk for 10 minutes on, and he may not talk in every COA, but we did one on mixed use, and we did one on windows, and we did, we rejected this, and this is why, whatever, just how high level. Then the high priorities, Amy, about 5 minutes. Ongoing projects, so Mike is gonna talk, Jolene's gonna talk, and you're gonna talk, so that's like only a few minutes each. So maybe one slide a piece. And then Mike's gonna talk about HPB and HLI, and that's probably one slide. And then new projects, again, one slide. So it's just like a slide or two, is what I'm thinking.
So, okay. And who is preparing the presentation?
Where you put a slide together, and then you put it in the Littleton template, can you do that? And you send it to Andrea by November 8th.
Okay, November 8th. And
You have-
so basically you just want the text. Okay.
I mean, if you could put it in slide format, is that hard?
Well, but without that template.
You can just put whatever you want, and I'll transfer everything.
Okay, gotcha.
I'll
And
just
then
redo it.
I'll try to get this agenda out like this week. I'll send it over to staff in the next couple days, so you have it.
All right.
But that's what I'm thinking, if you think that works.
I think that sounds great.
Yeah, thank you for taking that on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to start with expansion of the district. I think that's not, that's the
Yeah,
last thing. That's the
yeah.
last thing.
Maybe, we'll read the room, if they're all like this, probably they won't go
Well,
there.
and my experience with city council is you can never predict where they go. They can often go down a path that you never thought of.
And they may well, I mean, we're talking about, we're gonna do all of this presentation, they may zero in and start asking questions.
Or they may pull, lots of times they just pull something,
Right.
and sometimes they just sit and listen, you never know.
Yeah, whatever, yeah.
It's real, we have to be nimble.
You have 4 new council members.
Yeah, we may have new council members.
Couple minutes.
So we could have, some may come back.
At least two.
Two new,
At least 2 new ones, yeah.
but we may have more new,
Up to 4.
up to 4. Okay. So we go ahead and adjourn the meeting? Yes, let's go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for coming.